The carriages arrived at Castle Vacarescu as twilight bled into night, their wheels crunching over gravel paths lined with ancient yew trees that seemed to lean inward like conspirators sharing secrets. Elena pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the fortress emerge from the Transylvanian mist, its towers piercing the darkening sky like accusatory fingers. Beside her, Lord Stefan adjusted his cravat for the third time, his jaw set with the determination of a man who viewed the evening not as celebration, but as conquest. "You seem nervous," Elena observed quietly, though she knew the truth. Stefan was never nervous. He was calculating, measuring, always counting the value of every gesture and glance. Stefan turned to her with that practiced smile that had once seemed charming but now felt like a mask poorly fitted. "I am ensuring we make the proper impression. The Vacarescu family holds considerable influence in these regions. Your conduct tonight will reflect upon both of us." Elena said nothing. She had learned in the 3 months since their engagement that silence was often her safest response. Stefan had been chosen for her by her uncle, a wealthy merchant who saw in the match an elevation of their family name. Stefan saw in Elena a beautiful ornament to display, proof of his rising status among the nobility. What Elena saw in Stefan was a future of empty rooms and emptier conversations, a life measured in social obligations and carefully managed appearances. The carriage door opened, and Stefan descended first, extending his hand to her with theatrical gallantry. Elena took it and stepped down onto the cobblestones, her emerald gown rustling around her ankles. The castle loomed above them, its windows glowing with candlelight that flickered like distant stars. Music drifted from within, a waltz played on violin and pianoforte, elegant and melancholy. Other guests were arriving, their carriages forming a procession along the curved driveway. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in tailored coats moved toward the entrance, their laughter bright and brittle in the cold air. Elena recognized some faces from other gatherings, the same tired circuit of aristocratic families who attended each other's events with the enthusiasm of prisoners at a sentencing. Stefan placed his hand at the small of her back, a gesture that appeared protective but felt possessive. "Stay close to me tonight. I have business to discuss with Count Vacarescu, and I want you visible. Let them see what I have secured." Elena felt something twist in her chest at those words. What I have secured, as if she were property, a deed signed and witnessed. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain the serene expression she had perfected over months of such evenings. They entered through massive oak doors, carved with scenes of ancient battles, warriors and beasts locked in eternal struggle. The entrance hall stretched before them, all polished marble and crystal chandeliers that threw fractured light across the faces of assembled guests. Servants in livery moved among them with trays of wine and champagne, silent as shadows. The ballroom itself was a cathedral of opulence, vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes of classical myths, scenes of transformation and tragedy rendered in fading colors. Tapestries depicting hunts and festivals hung between tall windows draped in crimson velvet. The floor was a checkerboard of black and white marble, polished to such perfection that it reflected the dancers like a dark mirror. Stefan immediately began working the room, guiding Elena from group to group, introducing her with phrases that emphasized her beauty and docility. She smiled and curtsied and spoke the expected pleasantries while her mind wandered elsewhere, watching the candles burn down in their sconces, counting the minutes until she could reasonably claim fatigue. It was during one such introduction, as Stefan spoke to a pompous magistrate about property law, that Elena felt it. A change in the atmosphere, subtle as a shift in temperature. The music continued but seemed to grow distant, muffled. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the entrance. A man stood framed in the doorway. No, not a man. Something wearing the shape of one. He was tall and lean, dressed entirely in black, save for a white cravat at his throat. His hair was dark and swept back from a face of sharp angles and pale skin that seemed to hold its own luminescence. But it was his eyes that captured Elena, held her frozen in place. They were dark as wells, ancient and knowing, and they found her across the crowded room with the precision of an arrow finding its mark. "The Count," someone whispered nearby. "He actually came." The murmur spread through the ballroom like ripples across water. Elena felt Stefan stiffen beside her, his hand tightening on her elbow. She wanted to look away from those eyes, but found herself unable, caught like a moth before flame. The stranger moved into the room and the crowd parted for him without conscious thought, bodies shifting aside as if repelled by some invisible force. Count Vacarescu hurried forward to greet him, all nervous energy and forced joviality, but the dark figure barely acknowledged him. His gaze remained fixed on Elena. Stefan noticed. Of course, Stefan noticed. He pulled Elena closer, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her arm through her glove. "That is the Count," he hissed into her ear. "Keep your eyes downcast. Do not attract his attention." But it was too late for that. The Count was already approaching, cutting through the assembly with unhurried purpose. Guests fell silent as he passed, their faces mixtures of fascination and fear. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat a drum announcing some approaching doom. He stopped before them. This close, Elena could see the impossible smoothness of his skin, unmarred by sun or age. His scent reached her, something like old books and cold stone and a sweetness she could not identify. When he spoke, his voice was low and textured, like velvet drawn across bare skin. "Good evening." "I do not believe we have been introduced." Stefan stepped partially in front of Elena, his posture protective but his voice strained. "Lord Stefan Dalka, Your Excellency. And this is my betrothed, Miss Elena Georgiou." The Count's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, but contained no warmth. Betrothed? How? Fortunate. His eyes never left Elena's face. And does the lady speak for herself, or must all words pass through her keeper? Elena felt a flash of something she had not experienced in months. Indignation. Not at the Count's rudeness, but at the truth embedded in his question. Before she could stop herself, she lifted her chin and met his gaze directly. "I am capable of speech, sir, when there is something worth saying." Stefan's hand clamped down on her arm, hard enough to bruise, but she did not flinch. The Count's smile deepened, reaching his eyes now with something like approval. "Indeed, I can see that." He extended his hand toward her. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Georgiou?" The request hung in the air like a challenge. Around them the other guests had gone utterly still, watching this strange tableau unfold. Stefan's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "Absolutely not. My betrothed is not available for dancing with strangers." The Count finally looked at Stefan, and Elena saw her fiancé blanch under that gaze. "I assure you I am no stranger to these halls. I have been a guest of the Vacarescu family since before your grandfather drew breath. But if the lady declines, I shall of course respect her wishes." He turned back to Elena, waiting. Elena knew she should refuse, should defer to Stefan's authority as was expected, should maintain the proper boundaries of her engagement. But looking into those ancient eyes, she saw something that called to a part of her she had been slowly burying under layers of obligation and resignation. She saw recognition, as if this stranger knew her, truly knew her in a way that no one else in this glittering assembly ever had. "I accept," she heard herself say. Stefan's grip tightened further. "Elena." His voice was a warning laced with threat. The Count extended his hand closer, palm up, waiting. "Dance with me. He will see you are taken." The words were spoken quietly, but they resonated through Elena's entire being. There was promise in them and danger and a strange liberation. She pulled her arm free from Stefan's grasp, ignoring his sharp intake of breath, and placed her hand in the Count's. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt a shock of cold that should have been unpleasant, but instead felt clarifying, like plunging into winter water after too long in a stifling room. He led her onto the dance floor, and the musicians, who had been frozen in uncertainty, struck up a new waltz. The Count's hand found her waist, and they began to move. He danced with fluid precision, guiding her through the steps with such assurance that she forgot to think about her feet and simply followed. They moved together as if they had done this 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different lifetimes. "You should not have accepted," he said as they turned. "Your betrothed will make you pay for this defiance." Elena found herself being honest in a way she rarely allowed. Perhaps But for this moment, I do not care." His expression shifted, something flickering across those ageless features. Sorrow, perhaps, or recognition of kindred suffering. "Do you know what I am, Elena Georgiou?" She should have been frightened by the use of her name, the intimacy it implied. Instead, she felt only a strange calm. "I know you are not what you appear to be. Very astute. And yet you dance with me anyway." They spun past other couples who had resumed dancing, though Elena noticed they maintained a careful distance, giving the Count and his partner a wide berth. She could feel eyes upon them from every corner of the ballroom, feel Stefan's rage like heat against her back. "Why did you ask me to dance?" she said. The Count was silent for a long moment, guiding her through a complex series of turns. When he spoke again, his voice held an weight of centuries. "Because I saw in you something I have not seen in a very long time, a spirit not yet broken, a will not yet crushed. You reminded me of someone. Who? Someone I failed to save." The sadness in those words was profound, genuine in a way that cut through all pretense. Elena found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by that vulnerability, despite every instinct warning her away. The music swelled around them, violins crying out in minor keys. "What happened to her?" Elena asked. The Count's jaw tightened. "She chose death rather than accept the life I offered. She chose purity over preservation, light over shadow, and you have regretted it ever since." It was not a question. The Count looked at her with such intensity that Elena felt stripped bare, every hidden thought and secret longing exposed under that gaze. "You understand, somehow impossibly you understand. I understand what it means to be trapped," she said quietly. "To feel your life slipping away while you watch helplessly. To know that the future holds only a slow suffocation of everything you truly are." The music reached its crescendo, and they turned faster now, the ballroom spinning around them in a blur of candlelight and shadow. Elena felt dizzy, but not from the movement, from the strange intimacy of this conversation, from the way this creature in human form saw her so clearly. "It does not have to be that way," the Count said. "There are always choices, Elena. Paths untaken, doors unopened. And what lies behind those doors? Freedom or damnation?" His smile was sad and ancient, perhaps both, perhaps neither. "The only certainty is that what lies ahead on your current path is a living death, a slow erasure of self until nothing remains but obedience and emptiness." The music ended. They stopped moving but did not immediately separate. The Count still held her hand, still kept his other hand at her waist. Around them, polite applause rippled through the assembly, brittle and uncertain. "Thank you for the dance," Elena whispered. "The gratitude should be mine." He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. "Be careful, Miss Georgiou. Your betrothed is not a forgiving man." Elena turned and saw Stefan stalking toward them, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him, several other men watched with expressions of malicious anticipation, scenting conflict like hounds on a blood trail. "Neither am I," she found herself saying, and was surprised by the steel in her own voice. The Count's smile returned, genuine and approving. "No, I suspect you are not." He bowed to her, a gesture of such old-world courtesy that it seemed to come from another age entirely. "Until we meet again, Elena Georgiou." He turned and walked away, the crowd parting once more, and Elena watched him disappear through a side entrance. She barely had time to register his departure before Stefan was upon her, his hand clamping around her upper arm with punishing force. "You will come with me. Now." His voice was low but vibrating with rage. He hauled her from the dance floor, ignoring her stumble, pulling her through the assembled guests toward a quieter corridor. Elena's face burned with humiliation but also with defiance. Let them watch. Let them see what Stefan truly was beneath his gentleman's facade. He found an empty receiving room and shoved her inside, slamming the door behind them. The music from the ballroom became muffled, distant. Stefan paced before her like a caged animal, his fists clenched at his sides. "How dare you," he finally said, his voice shaking. "How dare you humiliate me like that in front of everyone?" "I accepted a dance," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. There was nothing improper about it. Nothing improper. Stefan whirled on her. That creature is not to be trusted. The stories they tell about him, the things he has done. And you parade yourself in his arms like some common trollop seeking attention. The insult struck like a physical blow. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. I am not your property, Stefan. Not yet. The engagement can still be broken. His laugh was ugly, devoid of humor. Break our engagement? And go where, Elena? Back to your uncle's house in disgrace. Do you think any respectable man would have you after such a scandal? You are mine. The contracts are signed. The dowry paid. You will marry me, and you will learn to behave as a proper wife should. He stepped closer, looming over her. And after we are wed, I will teach you obedience, however long it takes. Elena looked up at him and saw with terrible clarity what her future held. Years of this. Decades, perhaps. Stefan's cruelty masked as discipline, her spirit slowly crushed under the weight of his expectations, children raised in a household where love was performance and fear was the truest bond. The Count's words echoed in her mind. There are always choices, paths untaken, doors unopened. I will never be obedient to you, she said quietly. You may force me to marry you. You may control my circumstances, but you will never control what I am inside. Never. Stefan's hand rose, and for a moment Elena was certain he would strike her. But he mastered himself, lowering his arm with visible effort. We will see about that. We will see how defiant you remain after a few months of marriage. Now compose yourself. We are returning to the ballroom, and you will smile and be gracious for the remainder of this evening. Am I understood? Elena said nothing, which Stefan took for acquiescence. He opened the door and gestured sharply for her to precede him. She walked past, her head high despite the trembling in her limbs. They returned to find the ball in full swing, though Elena noticed the whispers that followed their re-entry, noticed the knowing looks exchanged between matrons. Scandals fed the social machinery of these gatherings, and she had provided rich fuel indeed. Stefan did not leave her side for the rest of the evening, his hand always on her arm or at her back, a constant reminder of ownership. Elena endured it all with frozen courtesy, dancing when commanded, smiling when expected, becoming the perfect doll Stefan desired. But inside, something had changed. A door had opened in her mind, revealing possibilities she had not dared to consider before. The Count's face haunted her thoughts. Those ancient eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, that voice promising freedom and danger in equal measure. When they finally departed near midnight, Elena looked back at Castle Vacarescu one last time. A figure stood in one of the upper windows, silhouetted against candlelight, watching, waiting. Even from this distance, Elena felt the weight of that gaze. The carriage ride back was silent. Stefan stared out his window, jaw clenched. Elena stared out hers, mind racing with questions that had no safe answers. She did not know then that the Count would visit her dreams that night, did not know that his voice would whisper through her sleeping mind, calling to something deep within her soul, did not know that she stood at a threshold between two worlds, two fates, two versions of herself. All she knew was that she had danced in darkness and found it less frightening than the light, and that terrified her more than anything else could. Elena woke in darkness to the sound of rain against her window. For a moment she lay disoriented, unsure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she felt it again, that sensation of being watched, of a presence hovering just beyond the edges of perception. She sat up slowly, drawing the blankets around her shoulders against the chill that permeated her bedroom. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting barely enough light to illuminate the familiar shapes of furniture. Her room in her uncle's estate had always felt safe before, a sanctuary from the demands of social performance. Tonight it felt different, exposed, as if the walls had grown thin as paper. "Elena," a voice whispered, so soft she almost believed she had imagined it. She turned toward the window. The curtains stirred, though she had closed them before retiring. Through the gap she could see the grounds below, rain-soaked and gleaming in moonlight that broke occasionally through racing clouds. And there, at the edge of the garden where the manicured lawn gave way to wild forest, a figure stood motionless. Even at this distance, Even in darkness, she knew him. Her heart began to race, not entirely with fear. She should call for her maid, for her uncle, for anyone, should raise an alarm that a stranger lurked on the property. Instead, she found herself rising from bed, pulling on her dressing gown, moving toward the window as if drawn by invisible strings. The Count remained where he was, looking up at her window, waiting. His stillness was absolute, inhuman. No living man could stand so motionless in the rain. As if the elements themselves bent around him, rather than touching his form. Eleanor's hand reached for the window latch before she could question the impulse. The glass swung open and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, that peculiar sweetness she had noticed at the ball. Not flowers exactly, something older, like honey left too long in darkness. "Come down," the Count said, and though his voice was not raised, she heard it clearly over the rain and wind. "Come speak with me." Every rational thought screamed that this was madness, that she should close the window, lock it, hide beneath her covers like a child. But rationality had governed her life for so long, led her step by careful step into Stefan's cage. And where had it brought her? To a future of quiet suffocation. She withdrew from the window, leaving it open, and moved through her darkened room. The house slept around her, servants in their quarters, her uncle in his distant wing. No one would know if she slipped outside for a few moments. No one need ever discover this transgression. The back stairs were servants' domain, but Elena knew them well from childhood explorations. She descended in bare feet, the stone cold against her skin, her dressing gown trailing behind her like a ghost's shroud. The kitchen door was bolted, but the lock yielded easily to her trembling fingers. Rain soaked through her nightclothes almost immediately as she stepped outside. The garden stretched before her. Rose bushes bowed under the downpour, gravel paths turned to streams. She should have been freezing, but felt only a strange numbness, as if her body belonged to someone else. The Count waited beneath an old oak at the garden's edge, sheltered somewhat by the spreading branches. As Elena approached, he stepped forward into full moonlight, and she saw him clearly for the first time without the distraction of crowds and candlelight. He was beautiful in the way ancient statues were beautiful, all clean lines and perfect proportion, but there was no warmth in that beauty. His skin held the pallor of marble, his dark eyes reflected no light. When he smiled at her approach, she glimpsed teeth too white, too sharp. "You came," he said simply. Elena stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. Alone in darkness with a creature she knew was dangerous, wearing only nightclothes, no one aware of where she had gone. "I should not have, but you did." He tilted his head, studying her. "Why?" She wrapped her arms around herself, less from cold than from the need to hold something together inside herself that felt ready to shatter. "Because you saw me. At the ball, you looked at me, and you saw what everyone else refuses to acknowledge, that I am dying by inches. That this life they have planned for me is a tomb they are building stone by stone." The Count was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured to a stone bench beneath the oak, sheltered from the worst of the rain. "Sit with me. Let me tell you a story." Elena knew she should refuse, should flee back to the safety of her room. Instead, she found herself moving to the bench, settling onto the cold stone. The Count sat beside her close enough that she could feel the coldness radiating from him like winter air. 300 years ago, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a tale told many times before. There lived a man who believed himself righteous. He was a warrior, a defender of his people, a champion of the faith. He fought against invaders and heretics with equal fervor, convinced that violence in God's name was holy work. He paused, looking out into the rain-swept darkness. But war changes men, hardens them. Each battle, each killing chips away at the soul, until what remains is something sharp and cold and unrecognizable. This man began to wonder if there truly was a God who cared about the blood spilled in his name, or if humanity was alone in the darkness, creating meaning where none existed. Elena listened, transfixed. She had heard legends of Count Dracula, whispers shared in parlors when the candles burned low, but she had never heard him speak of himself, never heard the sorrow beneath the monster. Then the warrior's beloved died, the Count continued, took her own life rather than wait for him to return from yet another campaign. And in his grief and rage he made a choice. If God would not grant him justice, he would seize his own immortality. He would become death itself, eternal and unchanging, beyond the reach of time or divine judgment. He turned to look at Elena directly. But immortality is not freedom, Elena Georgiou. It is the cruelest prison imaginable. To watch centuries pass, to see everyone you might love wither and die, to remain unchanging while the world transforms around you. He is frozen in the moment of his greatest rage and sorrow, unable to move forward, unable to die. Elena felt tears on her cheeks, though she had not realized she was crying. The story was allegory and confession both, wrapped in the safety of third-person narrative. You are speaking of yourself. The Count smiled sadly. I am speaking of what I was, what I became, and what I cannot escape. Why are you telling me this? Elena whispered. What do you want from me? He looked away again, back toward the forest that loomed beyond the garden. When I saw you at the ball, I recognized something. The way you moved through that gilded cage they have built for you, smiling and obedient while your spirit screamed for escape. I have seen that look before, worn it myself, in the years before I surrendered my humanity. So you came to warn me, to tell me my fate? No, I came to offer you a choice. His voice was low, intense. The choice I never gave to the woman I loved 3 centuries ago. The choice I have regretted withholding every night since. Elena's breath caught. What choice? The Count reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was ice-cold, but she did not flinch. You can marry your Stefan, live your predetermined life, have your children and manage your household and die having never truly lived. That is the safe path, the expected path. And the other path? Elena asked, though part of her already knew. You can choose darkness, choose transformation, become something more than human, freed from mortality and the small tyrannies of men like Stefan Dalka. You would be powerful, eternal, able to shape your own destiny rather than accepting one forced upon you. As a vampire, Elena said flatly, as one of the damned. The Count's grip on her hand tightened. Damnation is subjective. What the Church calls sin, I call liberation. What they call death, I call rebirth. Yes, there would be sacrifice. You would have to drink blood to survive. You would have to hide from daylight. You would be called monster by those who fear what they cannot control. Elena tried to pull her hand away, but he held firm, forcing her to look at him. But you would be free, Elena, truly free, no husband to command you, no society to judge you, no slow erosion of self, until nothing remains but obedience and regret. The offer hung between them like forbidden fruit, tempting and terrible. Elena thought of Stefan's face when he had threatened her after the dance, the promise of years spent learning obedience. Thought of the children she would bear him, raised to perpetuate the same cycles of control and submission. Thought of her own mother, dead at 40 from exhaustion and neglect, worn down by a marriage that consumed her from within. And what if I choose your darkness? She asked quietly. What if I accept your gift and then discover the price is too high? Can I return to mortality? The Count released her hand. No. The transformation is irreversible. Once made, it cannot be unmade. You would be changed forever, for better or worse. That is why I give you the choice rather than simply taking what I want. I will not rob you of agency, as Stefan seeks to do. Elena stood abruptly, moving away from the bench, needing distance to think. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the cold was beginning to penetrate her numbness. She turned back to face him. You said I reminded you of someone you failed to save. Who was she? The Count rose as well, his movements fluid as shadow. Her name was Elisabetta. She was everything good and pure in my life, the last connection to my humanity. When she died, I thought to bring her back as I had been brought back, to give her eternal life beside me. But she refused. Why? Because she understood what I could not. That immortality purchased with blood is no gift. That to surrender one's humanity is to lose the very thing that makes existence meaningful. She chose death rather than become what I had become, and in doing so, she condemned me to centuries of solitude and regret. Elena wrapped her arms around herself again. So why offer me the same fate she rejected? Why not let me live and die as she chose to? The Count moved closer, though he maintained careful distance. Because you are not Elisabetta, you do not have her faith, her certainty of divine grace beyond the grave. I see in you a different kind of spirit, one that burns against constraint, one that would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. I could be wrong, but I do not think I am. Elena turned the words over in her mind, testing them against her knowledge of herself. Was he right? Would she truly choose damnation over the cage Stefan represented? Could she kill to survive, drink blood, and become the thing that mothers used to frighten children into obedience? I need time, she said finally. This is too much to decide in a single night. The Count bowed his head in acknowledgement. Of course, I do not seek to pressure you. But time is not infinite, Elena. Stefan will marry you soon. Once you are his wife, the law will own you as surely as any vampire's bite. Your window of choice will close. How long do I have? 1 week. The Count's voice was gentle but firm. 7 nights from now I will return to this garden. If you come to me then, I will take it as your answer. If you do not, I will leave you to your mortal fate and never trouble you again. Elena nodded slowly. 1 week. 7 nights to decide between the life she had always known and an eternity of darkness. 7 nights to weigh slavery against damnation, safety against freedom, humanity against power. Go now, the Count said softly. Return to your room before you are missed. And Elena, whatever you decide, know that I have seen your true self. That knowledge cannot be taken from you even if you choose the cage. Elena turned and ran back toward the house, her bare feet splashing through puddles, her sodden nightclothes clinging to her skin. She did not look back, could not bear to see him standing there in the garden, watching her flee like a frightened child. She reached her room and stripped off the wet garments, toweling herself dry with shaking hands. Only when she was back beneath the covers, the window firmly closed and curtained, did she allow herself to fully absorb what had just occurred. A vampire had offered her immortality, had offered her a choice no woman in her position ever received: freedom or safety, power or propriety, damnation or slow death by 1,000 small concessions. Sleep did not return for the rest of that night. Elena lay awake watching shadows shift across her ceiling, her mind turning endlessly over the Count's words. By the time dawn light crept through her curtains, she had reached no conclusions, only exhausted herself with circular thinking. Her maid arrived with morning tea and commented on her pale appearance. "A restless night, miss. Perhaps you are coming down with something." Elena accepted the cup with numb fingers. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I am waking up to something." The maid looked confused but said nothing more, laying out Elena's dress for the day and withdrawing to prepare her bath. Elena sat holding the teacup, feeling its warmth seep into her cold hands, and tried to remember what it felt like to be certain about anything. The next days passed in a strange fugue. Stefan called twice, taking tea in the parlor while discussing wedding arrangements with her uncle. Elena sat silent through these meetings, watching Stefan's mouth move, hearing his words from a great distance. He had already forgotten the ball or chosen to ignore it, moving forward with his plans, as if nothing had challenged his ownership. Her uncle was delighted with the match, praising Stefan's prospects and connections. "You are fortunate, my dear," he told Elena over dinner one evening. "Lord Dalka will provide well for you. You will want for nothing." Elena pushed food around her plate. "And what if I want to not marry him at all?" Her uncle's expression hardened. "We have been through this. The contracts are signed. Your parents' debts have been settled with your dowry. You will marry Stefan in 3 weeks' time, and that is final. This childish reluctance is unbecoming. 3 weeks. Less time than she had imagined. The cage door was closing faster than she had realized. That night, the 3rd night since her meeting with the Count, Elena found a rose on her windowsill when she retired. Black as midnight, its petals somehow still fresh despite no stem to sustain them. She picked it up carefully, felt the silk texture against her fingers, brought it to her face. The scent was heady, intoxicating. Roses and earth, and that sweet corruption she was beginning to associate with the Count. A reminder, a promise, a threat. She could not be certain which. By the fifth night, Elena had begun slipping out to the garden each evening after the household slept, not to the oak where she had met the Count, but to the rose garden where she could think without feeling observed. She would sit on the damp grass in her nightclothes, heedless of propriety or chill, and try to imagine each future before her. Life with Stefan, children born to a loveless union, years of carefully managed social appearances while her spirit withered, growing old in silent desperation, dying having never truly lived. Safe, predictable, acceptable, utterly soul-destroying, life as the Count offered it. Power and freedom purchased with blood. Immortality spent in shadow, feared and alone, cut off from everything human and warm. Damned by every measure of the faith she had been raised to believe. Monstrous, powerful, free. But at what cost? On the sixth night, Elena found another gift. A leather-bound journal left on the stone bench beneath the oak. She opened it carefully and recognized the handwriting immediately, though she had never seen it before. The Count's hand was elegant, archaic, the script of another century. The journal contained his story, written across decades, his mortal life, his transformation. The wars he had fought and the loves he had lost, the slow erosion of his humanity and the desperate attempts to reclaim it. Each entry was raw, unflinching, hiding nothing of his crimes or his regrets. Elena read through the night, unable to stop, compelled by the intimacy of these confessions. He had given her this deliberately, she realized, was showing her the full truth of what she might become, not trying to seduce her with promises of power, but laying bare the reality of his existence. The final entry was recent, written just days before. I have lived 3 centuries and never found redemption, never found a way to reclaim the humanity I surrendered in rage and grief. But in Elena Georgiou I see a possibility, not for my own salvation, which is long past hoping for, but for hers. If she chooses mortality, even trapped and diminished, at least her soul remains intact. If she chooses transformation, at least she does so with open eyes. Either way, she will have had a choice. That is more than I gave to Elisabetta, more than I gave to myself. Elena closed the journal and held it against her chest, tears streaming down her face. He was not trying to damn her. He was trying to give her what he had never had, true agency, the power to determine her own fate, even if that fate was terrible. The 7th night arrived with cruel swiftness. Elena moved through the day in a haze of barely contained panic. Stefan came for dinner, discussing his plans for their household after the wedding, describing the life he would create for them. A beautiful prison, all comfort and constraint, where Elena would exist as ornament and incubator, never as a full person in her own right. When he finally departed, Elena went to her room and dismissed her maid early. She stood before her mirror, studying her reflection, dark hair tumbling past her shoulders, skin still flushed with life and warmth, eyes that had not yet learned to see in darkness. This was perhaps the last night she would look upon her human face, or the first night of the rest of her mortal existence, shortened though it would be by misery. She dressed in a simple white gown, something that could serve as either wedding dress or funeral shroud. Let the Count interpret that symbolism however he wished. Then she made her way downstairs through the silent house one final time, her bare feet remembering the path to the kitchen door. The garden waited, silver in moonlight. The oak tree loomed at the forest's edge, its spreading branches creating a pool of shadow beneath. And there, standing patient as stone, stood the Count. Elena walked toward him slowly, each step a small eternity. He watched her approach, his face unreadable, his dark eyes reflecting nothing. When she reached the oak's shadow, she stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. The Count studied her white gown, the resolution in her posture, the journal she carried clutched against her chest. Elena studied his face, trying to see past the monster to the man he had once been. "Have you decided?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena took a deep breath. "I have." The Count waited, offering no pressure, no persuasion, simply waiting for her to speak her own fate. Elena thought of Stefan's face when he threatened her, thought of her uncle's casual dismissal of her wishes, thought of all the women who had come before her, trapped in the same gilded cages, their spirits crushed beneath the weight of expectation. Thought of her mother's grave, the epitaph that said loving wife and devoted mother, but nothing about who she had been before those roles consumed her. She thought of the Count's journal, the honesty of his suffering, the courage required to live century after century, carrying the weight of what he had become. Thought of the choice he had given her, the respect he had shown in laying out the full truth rather than seducing her with comfortable lies. And she thought of Elisabetta, who had chosen death over darkness, certain of divine grace beyond the grave. Elena had no such certainty, had no faith strong enough to sustain her through decades of quiet desperation, had only the fierce conviction that she would rather burn bright and damned than fade slowly into nothing. "I choose transformation," Elena said quietly. "I choose freedom, whatever its cost. I choose to become what you are, for better or worse. I choose the darkness." The Count closed his eyes, and in that moment Elena saw something flicker across his face. Relief, perhaps, or grief, or both tangled together beyond separation. "Are you certain?" he asked, opening his eyes again. "Once begun, this cannot be stopped. You will die and be reborn. You will lose the sun, lose your reflection, lose every connection to your human life. You will become the thing that mothers warn their children about in the dark. Are you truly certain?" Elena dropped the journal and reached for his hand, taking that cold palm in her warm one. "I am certain. Transform me. Give me the darkness I choose rather than the light that will destroy me." The Count pulled her close, his arms encircling her with careful restraint. "So be it. But know this, Elena Georgiou. Whatever you become, whatever darkness we embrace, I will not abandon you to it. We will face this eternity together, for comfort or damnation. You will not be alone." Elena tilted her head back, exposing her throat. "Then do it. Before I lose courage, before I remember all the reasons this is madness." The Count lowered his head, his lips brushing against her neck, finding the pulse that beat there. Elena felt his breath cold against her skin, felt his teeth sharp and ready. And then, in the moment before he bit down, he whispered 3 words that made her realize the full scope of what was happening between them. "I love you." The pain was exquisite and brief. Elena felt his teeth pierce her flesh, felt her blood flowing out, felt her life beginning to ebb. But there was no fear, only a strange peace and a warmth that spread through her despite the coldness of his embrace. She was choosing. For the first time in her life, she was truly choosing her own fate. And as darkness claimed her vision and her heartbeat slowed to nothing, Elena Georgiou smiled. Elena woke to a world transformed. Every sense had been amplified beyond recognition, turned sharp and merciless and overwhelming. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse in the walls 3 rooms distant, could smell the residue of candle smoke from fires extinguished hours ago, could see in perfect clarity, despite the absolute darkness of the chamber where she lay. She sat up slowly, her body moving with a fluid grace she had never possessed in life. The room spun around her, and for a moment she thought she might be sick, but the nausea passed as quickly as it came, replaced by a hunger so profound it felt like her entire being had become an empty vessel, demanding to be filled. "Careful," a voice said from the shadows. "The first hours are always the most difficult." Elena turned toward the sound and saw the Count emerge from darkness as if he were part of it. He carried a silver goblet which he extended toward her. "Drink. It will help with the hunger, until you are strong enough to hunt properly." She took the goblet with trembling hands and looked down at the dark liquid within. Blood. Still warm, still fragrant, with the life it had contained. Her human mind recoiled in horror, but her body sang with need, demanding that she drink until the emptiness was filled. Elena raised the goblet to her lips and tasted blood for the first time. The flavor exploded across her tongue, complex and intoxicating, like wine and honey and something indefinable that called to the predator she had become. She drank deeply, feeling strength flow back into her limbs, feeling the terrible hunger recede to manageable levels. When the goblet was empty, she lowered it and looked at the Count with new eyes. She could see him now in ways she never had before, could see the faint luminescence that clung to his skin, the absolute stillness of a body that no longer needed to breathe, the ancient power that radiated from him like heat from flame. "Where am I?" she asked, and her voice sounded different to her own ears. Richer, deeper, carrying harmonics she had never produced before. "My castle," the Count replied, "in the Carpathian Mountains, far from your uncle's estate. You have been unconscious for 3 nights while the transformation completed itself. I brought you here where you would be safe during the change." Elena looked around the chamber properly for the first time. It was circular, carved from stone, with narrow windows that had been shuttered against daylight. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting hunting scenes and battles, their colors still vibrant despite obvious age. A bed dominated the room, its posts carved with intricate designs of wolves and bats and other creatures of darkness. 3 nights, Elena repeated. "Stefan will have noticed my absence. My uncle will have called for searches." The Count moved to one of the shuttered windows, his hands clasped behind his back. "They found your nightgown by the forest edge, torn and bloodied. Your uncle believes you were taken by wolves. Stefan has called off the engagement. Unwilling to marry a woman presumed dead or worse. They buried an empty coffin yesterday with all appropriate ceremony." Elena absorbed this information with strange detachment. She was dead to her old world. The girl who had danced at the Vacarescu ball, who had endured Stefan's possessive grip, who had dreamed of escape without daring to pursue it, that girl was gone. In her place sat something new, something powerful, something free and terrible. "Do you regret it?" the Count asked quietly, still not looking at her. "Now that the change is complete, now that you feel the hunger and know what you must do to survive, do you regret your choice?" Elena considered the question honestly. She felt the hunger coiled in her belly like a living thing, felt the wrongness of her existence, the unnatural vitality that animated her dead flesh, knew that she would have to kill to continue this existence, would have to drink the life from others to sustain her own stolen immortality. But she also felt the absence of fear, the weight that had pressed upon her every moment of her mortal life, the constant anxiety of pleasing others and meeting expectations, and making herself small enough to fit into the boxes they built for her. All of that was gone. She was dangerous now, powerful, beholden to no one but herself. "No," she said finally, "I do not regret it, though I suspect I may come to before this eternity is finished." The Count turned to face her, and she saw approval in his dark eyes. "Honest as always, that is good. We must never lie to ourselves about what we are, Elena. The moment we begin to justify or romanticize our nature is the moment we lose the last vestiges of the humanity we once possessed." He moved closer, settling into a chair near the bed. "Now I must teach you to survive, to hunt without being detected, to move through human society without revealing yourself, to resist the bloodlust when it threatens to overwhelm your control. You have centuries ahead of you, but they will be short indeed if you do not master these skills quickly." Elena nodded, trying to focus past the hunger that gnawed at her insides. "Teach me then. I am ready to learn." The lessons began that night. The Count took her through the castle, showing her how to move in shadow, how to still herself into absolute motionlessness, how to extend her senses to detect nearby humans. His castle was ancient, all stone corridors and spiral staircases, hidden passages and forgotten chambers. Servants moved through it like ghosts, pale and silent, their eyes empty of will. "They are enthralled," the Count explained as they passed a maid who did not even glance in their direction. "Bound to my service through blood and compulsion. They remember nothing of their former lives, feel no desire beyond serving the castle's needs. It is mercy of a sort. They do not suffer the weight of their servitude." Elena watched the maid disappear around a corner, disturbed by the blankness in that gaze. Is that what I might become? A creature of pure hunger with no will remaining? "Only if you surrender to the beast within," the Count said. "Vampirism amplifies what already exists in the soul. Those who were cruel in life become monsters in death. Those who were weak become slaves to their hunger. But those who possessed strong will, those who chose this transformation deliberately rather than having it forced upon them, they retain their capacity for choice. You will always have to fight the hunger, Elena, but you are strong enough to win that fight." They climbed to the highest tower and emerged onto a balcony overlooking the mountains. The view stole what little breath Elena still drew. Peaks stretched endlessly in all directions, silver in moonlight, touched with mist that clung to valleys like ghostly rivers. The castle perched on a cliff edge, commanding the landscape like a sentinel watching over sleeping kingdoms. "This is your inheritance now," the Count said. "These mountains, this castle, this eternal night. You are no longer bound by the petty concerns of mortal life. No husband can command you. No society can judge you. You are apex predator, ancient and terrible. But with that power comes responsibility." Elena turned to look at him. "Responsibility to what? We are damned already. What do the damned owe to anything?" The Count's expression grew somber. "We owe it to ourselves not to become the monsters humans believe us to be. Yes, we must kill to survive. But we need not kill indiscriminately, need not torture or play with our food, need not become creatures of pure malice simply because we can. The line between vampire and demon is thin, Elena. It is maintained only through constant vigilance and the choice to retain some measure of the humanity we surrendered." Elena absorbed this, watching moonlight play across distant peaks. "So we are damned but dignified, monsters with manners. If you prefer to see it that way, yes." The Count moved to stand beside her at the balcony's edge. "I have seen vampires who surrendered entirely to their nature. They become mindless predators, killing without thought, unable to plan or reason beyond the next feeding. They rarely survive more than a few decades before hunters find and destroy them. If we wish to endure, we must remain more than our hunger." The wind carried scents to Elena's enhanced senses, pine and stone and far below, so distant it should have been undetectable. The smell of human habitation. A village nestled in the valley, cooking fires and unwashed bodies and beating hearts. Her hunger stirred at the recognition, urging her to descend, to hunt, to feed. "I can smell them," she whispered. "The villagers. I can hear their hearts beating." The Count's hand settled on her shoulder, cool and steadying. "Yes, the hunger will always be there, whispering temptations. You must learn to control it rather than letting it control you. Come, I will show you how to hunt without becoming a mindless killer." They descended from the tower and left the castle through a hidden passage that emerged in the forest below. The Count moved through the trees like smoke, utterly silent, and Elena followed, trying to match his grace. Her new body obeyed instinctively, finding handholds she could never have managed in life, moving with speed that would have terrified her human self. They reached the village as midnight bells tolled from a small church. The Count led her to the shadows near a tavern, where light and noise spilled from open windows. Inside, men drank and gambled, their faces flushed with alcohol and exertion. "Watch," the Count instructed. "Choose your prey carefully. Not the strong or healthy, their absence will be noted. Not children. There are lines even we do not cross. Choose the drunk, the dissolute, those whose deaths will seem natural or unsurprising." Elena studied the men inside, her hunger sharpening her focus. One in particular drew her attention. Older, his face marked with broken veins, his hands shaking as he raised a glass to his lips. A man already halfway to death, drowning himself one drink at a time. "Him," she said, pointing. "Good choice," the Count confirmed. "Now we wait for him to stumble home alone. Then you will feed for the first time." They withdrew deeper into shadow and waited. Time passed differently now, Elena noticed. Minutes felt like seconds, her vampiric patience allowing her to remain motionless without discomfort. Finally, the drunk man emerged, weaving unsteadily down the dirt road toward a cottage at the village edge. The Count gestured for Elena to follow. She moved after the man, her footsteps making no sound despite the gravel beneath her feet. When they were far enough from other dwellings, the Count spoke quietly. "Now, Elena, take him quickly and drink deep. The first kill is always the hardest, but it becomes easier with practice." Elena felt her hunger surge at his words, felt her body responding to the proximity of prey. She moved faster than thought, appearing before the drunk man, as if materializing from air itself. His eyes widened in shock and he tried to scream, but she was already on him, her newfound strength bearing him to the ground, her teeth finding his throat. The blood was different from what the Count had given her, warm and immediate, carrying the taste of the man's life within it. She could sense his memories as she drank, fragmentary images of a wasted existence, a wife who had left him, children who no longer spoke his name, decades of bitterness and self-destruction. She drank it all, feeling his life flowing into her, filling the emptiness, quieting the terrible hunger. When his heart finally stopped, Elena pulled away and looked down at what she had done. The man lay crumpled in the dirt, his face frozen in an expression of terror and confusion. She had killed him, had drunk his life away like wine from a bottle. The finality of it struck her with unexpected force. "The first death is always the hardest to bear," the Count said gently, kneeling beside her. "You took a life tonight, Elena. There is no undoing it, no absolution to be found. You are a killer now. That is the price of our existence." Elena wiped blood from her lips with the back of her hand. "Will it always feel like this? Like I have stolen something precious?" The Count was silent for a long moment. "If you retain your humanity, yes, every death will carry weight. But that weight is important, Elena. It reminds us what we are. The moment killing becomes easy, becomes pleasurable, that is when we cross the line from vampire to monster." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come, we must make this look natural. A drunk who fell and struck his head. Nothing to raise suspicions or draw hunters to the region." They arranged the body carefully, positioning it near a jutting stone that could have caused the visible wound at his throat if viewed by someone who did not look too closely. Then they withdrew back into shadow and made their way to the castle. Elena's mind churned with what she had done. She had killed a man, had ended his existence to sustain her own unnatural life. The weight of it pressed upon her like a physical burden, threatening to crush the strange new joy she had felt in her transformation. Back in her chamber, the Count left her alone to process her first kill. Elena sat on the bed and stared at her hands, still faintly stained with blood despite having wiped them clean. These hands had held teacups and embroidery needles, had been raised in her uncle's comfortable home, had been prepared for nothing more violent than needlework. Now they were weapons, capable of ending life with casual ease. She thought of Stefan, wondered what he would think if he could see her now. Would he recognize the docile fiancé he had sought to control? Or would he see only the monster she had become? The thought brought a cold smile to her lips. Let him remember her as victim of wolves. Let him marry some other unfortunate woman and inflict his cruelties upon her. Elena was beyond his reach now, beyond anyone's reach. The nights that followed established a pattern. The Count taught her the disciplines of vampirism, the skills necessary for long-term survival, how to move through human society without detection, adopting mannerisms and speech that would not mark her as other, how to control the bloodlust that threatened to overwhelm her in the presence of prey, how to sense danger, to recognize the signs of vampire hunters and those who walked in faith strong enough to harm the undead. But he also taught her more than mere survival. He showed her his library, vast chambers filled with books collected across centuries, philosophy and poetry, science and history, knowledge preserved from ages long past. He had been a scholar once, before war and transformation had claimed him, and that love of learning had survived even damnation. Elena devoured the books with the same hunger she brought to feeding. She had been denied serious education in life, taught only accomplishments suitable for a gentleman's wife. Now she could study anything, could spend centuries mastering subjects that would have been forbidden to her mortal self. The freedom of it was intoxicating. They spoke often during those early weeks, long conversations that stretched through the night hours. The Count told her of the ages he had lived through, the rise and fall of empires, the slow evolution of human civilization. He spoke of the loneliness of immortality, watching everyone he might have cared for age and die while he remained unchanging. Spoke of the temptation to simply end his existence, to walk into sunlight and embrace final death, but never quite finding the courage to do so. In turn, Elena spoke of her mortal life, the suffocation she had felt trapped in roles she never chose, the slow erosion of hope that had characterized her engagement to Stefan. Spoke of her mother's early death, worn down by childbirth and neglect, and her own terror of following that same path. spoke of the moment at the ball when she had looked into the Count's eyes and recognized a kindred spirit trapped in different chains. One night, perhaps a month into her new existence, they sat together in the library while rain lashed against the windows. The Count was reading from an ancient text, translating Latin verses into English for her benefit, when Elena interrupted with a question that had been building in her mind for days. "Why did you choose me?" she asked quietly. "Of all the women you must have encountered in 3 centuries, why offer transformation to me?" The Count closed the book and regarded her thoughtfully. "Because you reminded me of who I was before I surrendered to darkness, full of rage and pain and desperate need for freedom, willing to damn yourself rather than accept a prison disguised as safety. I saw in you the capacity to retain your humanity even in damnation, to be more than the monster this transformation could have made you. And because you loved me," Elena said, remembering his whispered confession before the bite. The Count's expression softened in ways she rarely saw. "Yes. Though I knew it was madness, knew I was repeating the same mistake I made with Elisabetta, falling in love with someone whose humanity I could only corrupt. But I am 3 centuries old and tired of being alone, tired of existing without connection or meaning. You offered the possibility of something different, a companion who chose this existence deliberately, someone who might understand the terrible freedom we possess." Elena rose from her chair and moved to stand before him. The Count remained seated, looking up at her with those ancient eyes. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the cold, marble smoothness of his skin, seeing her own pale hand against his even paler cheek. "I do not regret choosing you," she said softly. "Whatever damnation awaits, whatever weight of guilt I must carry, I would rather bear it beside you than spend a mortal lifetime slowly dying in Stefan's cage." The Count closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "You may come to regret those words. Immortality has a way of revealing the true cost of our choices, perhaps. But tonight, in this moment, I am more alive than I ever was, with a beating heart." The Count opened his eyes and stood, bringing them face to face. He cupped her face in both hands, his expression intense. "Then let us make a vow, Elena Georgiou. Let us promise never to lie to each other about what we are, never to pretend this existence is anything but what it truly is. Damnation chosen and accepted, with all its terrible freedom and all its crushing weight. Can you make that vow?" Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. "I can. I vow to face this eternity with open eyes, to never pretend we are anything but damned creatures surviving on stolen life. And I vow to face it beside you, for whatever comfort or torment that brings." The Count pulled her close and kissed her then, the first time their lips had met since her transformation. The kiss tasted of blood and darkness and desperate need, 2 damned souls clinging to each other against the weight of their own choices. When they finally parted, Elena felt something settle in her chest, something like peace, or perhaps its dark reflection. They stood together in the library while rain continued its assault on the castle walls, 2 monsters dressed in human form, finding in each other the only absolution they would ever know. Not forgiveness from any god, for they were beyond divine mercy now, but recognition, acceptance, the knowledge that they were not alone in their damnation. Outside, the night stretched endlessly before them, full of hunger and shadow and the weight of immortal existence. Inside, for this moment at least, they had each other. It would have to be enough, because it was all they had, and perhaps all they deserved. The hunter arrived on the first night of autumn, when the leaves had begun their slow surrender to death, and the air carried the promise of coming winter. Elena sensed him before she saw him, her vampiric instincts detecting the wrongness of his presence like a discordant note in otherwise harmonious music. She found the Count in his study, bent over maps and correspondence, and spoke the warning that would shatter their fragile peace. Someone approaches the castle, someone dangerous. The Count looked up from his work, his expression shifting from scholarly concentration to predatory alertness in an instant. He rose and moved to the window, extending his senses outward into the night. After a moment, his jaw tightened. A hunter, armed with faith and holy implements. He comes alone, but that makes him more dangerous, not less. Only the most skilled would dare approach this place without an army at his back. Elena joined him at the window, peering down at the winding path that led to the castle gates. A figure moved through the darkness below, unhurried but purposeful, climbing steadily toward them. Even from this distance she could see the crosses that hung from his belt, the blessed weapons he carried, the absolute confidence in his stride. "What do we do?" she asked, feeling fear for the first time since her transformation. Not fear of death, she was already dead, but fear of losing what she had found in these months with the Count. Fear of their eternity being cut short before it had truly begun. "We face him," the Count said simply. "Running would only delay the inevitable. Hunters like this one do not abandon their prey. Better to confront him here, on ground we control, than to flee and be pursued across continents." He turned from the window and began issuing commands to the enthralled servants, directing them to secure certain chambers and prepare defenses. Elena watched him work, marveling at the calm efficiency with which he faced this threat. 3 centuries had taught him many things, including how to stare down death without flinching. "You have faced hunters before," Elena observed. "Many times, some I killed, others killed companions I had taken. A few I even managed to convert to my cause, showing them that the world is more complex than their simple faith allows." The Count paused in his preparations and looked at her directly. "But I will not lie to you, Elena. This one feels different. The strength of his faith burns like a beacon. He is no mere zealot stumbling through superstitions. He is a true believer, and such men are the most dangerous enemies our kind can face." Elena felt her hands curl into fists. "Then we kill him. Together we are stronger than any mortal, no matter how faithful." The Count's smile was sad. Perhaps his faith is armor we cannot penetrate. We shall see soon enough." They descended to the great hall, that vast chamber where the Count had entertained nobility in ages past. Tapestries depicting hunts and battles hung on the walls, faded by centuries, but still magnificent. A throne sat on a raised dais at the far end, carved from a single massive piece of dark wood, and adorned with imagery of wolves and bats. The Count took his seat there, arranging himself in a posture of casual power, while Elena stood at his right hand. The castle gates opened at the Count's mental command, and they heard footsteps echoing through stone corridors, growing steadily closer. The hunter did not rush or hesitate, simply walked toward them with the inevitability of a man following his ordained purpose. He entered the great hall and stopped at the threshold, his eyes adjusting to the dim candlelight. Elena studied him carefully, cataloguing potential weaknesses. He was perhaps 40 years of age, tall and lean, with the build of a man who had spent his life in physical discipline. Dark hair streaked with grey at the temples, a face marked by weather and hardship. Lines carved deep around eyes that burned with fervent conviction. He wore simple travelling clothes, but carried himself with the bearing of a soldier or priest. "Count Dracula," the hunter said, his voice resonant and calm. "I am Father Mihai Albescu of the Order of St. Michael. I have come to end your reign of terror over these lands." The Count regarded him with interest, leaning back in his throne. "Father Albescu, I know your order's reputation. Fanatics who believe themselves instruments of divine will, cleansing the world of supernatural corruption. You are far from your monastery, priest. What brings you to my door specifically?" The hunter's eyes flicked to Elena, assessing her with a glance before returning to the Count. 3 months ago, a young woman disappeared from her uncle's estate near Bucharest, Elena Gheorghiu, recently engaged to be married. Her nightgown was found torn and bloodied near the forest. Her family believes her dead, killed by wolves or bandits. But I know better. Elena felt ice slide through her veins that had nothing to do with her undead nature. This man knew. Somehow he had traced her disappearance to this place, had followed the thread of her transformation to its source. The Count's expression remained neutral. "And what do you think you know, Father Albescu? I know that you attended a ball at Castle Vacarescu the night before Elena Gheorghiu vanished. I know that you danced with her despite her betrothed's objections. I know that witnesses saw you watching her throughout the evening with what they described as predatory interest." The hunter took a step forward, his hand moving to rest on the cross at his belt. "And I know that she stands here now at your side, transformed into an abomination, damned for eternity because of your corruption." The bluntness of the accusation hung in the air like smoke. Elena wanted to protest, to explain that she had chosen this fate deliberately, but the words died in her throat. How could she make this man understand? How could she convey that damnation had been preferable to the slow death Stefan represented? "You speak of corruption, as if it was something I inflicted upon an unwilling victim," the Count said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its measured tones. "But what if I told you that Elena Georgiou came to me willingly, that she chose transformation over the cage her mortal life had become? Would that change your judgment, priest?" Father Albescu's face hardened. "The damned always claim willing consent. It is part of the deception. No woman of faith and virtue would choose to become a creature of darkness unless her will had been compromised, her mind twisted by supernatural influence." Elena stepped forward, drawing the hunter's attention fully to her for the first time. "I was not a woman of faith, Father. I was a woman suffocating under the weight of expectations I never agreed to shoulder. My virtue was merely another chain binding me to a future I did not choose. The Count offered me freedom, and I took it with open eyes and full understanding of the price." The hunter studied her, and Elena saw something flicker in his expression. Pity, perhaps, or sorrow at what he perceived as a soul lost to darkness. "You believe that now, child. But the creature you have become whispers lies that seem like truth. In time, you will forget who you were before the transformation, will forget that you ever had a choice." "I will never forget," Elena said fiercely. "Every night when I wake, I remember the girl I was and the woman I refused to become. I remember Stefan's threats and my uncle's casual dismissal of my wishes. I remember the weight of powerlessness that crushed me every moment of my mortal life. And I am grateful, Father Albescu. Grateful to be free of it, whatever the cost to my immortal soul." The hunter's hand tightened on his cross. "Then you are lost indeed. And it is my sacred duty to grant you the final death you can no longer choose for yourself." He moved with shocking speed, pulling a stake from his belt and launching himself toward Elena. She barely had time to react, her new instincts screaming warning as the blessed wood came arcing toward her heart. She twisted aside and the stake missed her chest by inches, scoring a burning line across her shoulder instead. The pain was unlike anything Elena had experienced since her transformation, holy fire searing through undead flesh. She cried out and stumbled backward, clutching at the wound. The Count was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Elena and the hunter, his face contorted with rage. "You dare!" he hissed, and his voice carried the weight of centuries, the accumulated fury of an immortal being defending what was his. "You come into my home and attack under pretense of righteousness. I should tear out your throat and leave your corpse for the wolves." Father Albescu raised his cross, and the Count recoiled as if struck, the holy symbol creating an invisible barrier between them. "Your threats mean nothing, demon. I walk in the light of divine protection. Your darkness cannot touch me." The Count circled, looking for an opening, but the hunter moved with him, keeping the cross positioned between them. Elena watched the dance, her shoulder still burning from the blessed wound, and felt helpless rage building in her chest. This man would destroy them both if given the chance, would send them to whatever hell awaited unrepentant monsters, all while believing himself a hero. "Why?" Elena demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Why hunt us so relentlessly? We feed on the drunk and dying, those whose deaths bring relief rather than tragedy. We do not slaughter indiscriminately or create armies of undead. What threat do we pose that justifies this crusade?" Father Albescu turned to face her without lowering his cross, his expression that of a man explaining obvious truth to a confused child. "Because you exist. Because every night you continue, your unnatural existence is an affront to God's order. Because the damned cannot be allowed to walk freely among the living, no matter how they justify their predation. So there can be no redemption," Helena said bitterly. "No possibility that the damned might retain enough humanity to choose good over evil. We are simply monsters to be destroyed, regardless of our actions or intentions. Redemption requires true death and divine judgment," the hunter replied. "While you walk this earth in stolen bodies sustained by stolen life, you are beyond salvation." The mercy I offer is the mercy of the stake and the flame, sending you to face whatever judgment awaits." The Count had continued his slow circling, and now stood near one of the great hall's massive pillars. His voice when he spoke was cold and calculating. "Your faith is admirable, Father Albescu, but it blinds you to nuance, to the possibility that the world might be more complex than your scriptures allow. Elena and I are damned, yes, but we are damned with purpose. We have chosen this existence and accepted its weight. We do not seek to create more of our kind, do not plague humanity with mindless violence. We simply exist eternal and apart. Existence itself is the crime," the hunter insisted, "and I am the instrument of its punishment. Then come, priest." The Count's smile was terrible, all sharp teeth and ancient fury. "Test your faith against 3 centuries of survival. See if your God truly protects you from the darkness you claim to fight." He moved with blurring speed, faster than Elena had ever seen him move before, striking at the hunter from an angle the cross could not defend. Father Albescu spun to face him, but was a fraction too slow. The Count's hand closed around his throat, lifting him from the ground with casual strength. "Now," the Count said softly, his face inches from the hunter's. "Now we see how strong your faith truly is." But even as the words left his mouth, the cross at the hunter's belt began to glow with brilliant white light. The Count screamed and released his grip, stumbling backward with smoke rising from his hand where it had touched blessed flesh. Father Albescu dropped to the ground and raised his cross high, the light intensifying until it filled the hall with radiance that burned Elena's eyes. "By the power of the Almighty," the hunter intoned, his voice resonant with unshakable conviction, "I cast you back into the darkness from which you crawled. I deny you dominion over the living. I sentence you to the final death your corruption has earned." The light blazed brighter, and Elena felt it pressing against her like a physical force, driving her backward, burning through the darkness that sustained her. Beside her, the Count had fallen to his knees, his hands raised to shield his face from the terrible radiance. They were being overwhelmed, destroyed by the sheer force of this man's faith given manifest form. "No," Elena heard herself say, and the word came from somewhere deep within, from the part of her that had chosen damnation over slavery, that had walked into darkness with eyes open and will intact. "No, we will not be destroyed by your righteous certainty." She forced herself forward against the pressure of the light, every step agony, her flesh smoking where the radiance touched it. The hunter's eyes widened as she approached, his chanting faltering as he saw a damned creature walking directly into the manifestation of holy power. "You think yourself an instrument of God," Elena said through gritted teeth, still advancing despite the pain. "But you are merely a man with a cross and a conscience that lets you kill without guilt. You speak of abominations, but you are the one who would murder a woman for choosing freedom over captivity. Who is truly the monster here, Father Albescu?" She reached him and placed her burning hand over his, over the cross that blazed between them. The pain was excruciating, worse than anything she had felt in life or death, but she did not flinch or withdraw. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes and let him see the truth of what she was. "I chose this," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the holy light. "I chose damnation. I chose darkness. I chose the Count, and this existence and every consequence that comes with it. You cannot save someone who does not wish to be saved, priest. You can only destroy them and call it mercy." For a long moment, they stood locked together, her hand on his, the cross blazing between them. Then, slowly, the light began to dim. The hunter's certainty wavered as he looked into Elena's eyes and saw not a demon's malice, but a woman's fierce determination. Saw the humanity that persisted despite transformation, the will that had survived even death. The light faded entirely, and Father Albescu stumbled backward, his face pale with shock. His hand trembled as he lowered the cross. The Count remained on his knees, watching this exchange with an expression Elena could not read. "You chose this," the hunter whispered, and his voice carried not triumph, but something like grief. "God help me, I believe you. You truly chose this damnation." Elena lowered her burned hand, feeling the wounds already beginning to heal with vampiric resilience. "Yes, and I would choose it again, knowing everything I know now. The cage you would condemn me to in the name of salvation, is worse than any hell that awaits the damned. Father Albescu looked between them, his face a battlefield of conflicting convictions. His faith told him to destroy them both, to complete his sacred mission. But his eyes had seen what his doctrine did not allow for: a vampire who retained her humanity, a damned soul who had chosen her fate with full knowledge, and continued to choose it even when offered the escape of redemption through death. "I cannot kill you," he said finally, and the words seemed torn from him. "My vow requires that I destroy the damned, but you are not what I expected to find. You are not mindless predators or corrupted innocents. You are something I have no guidance for." "Then leave," the Count said, rising to his feet with rigid dignity. "Leave and do not return. We will continue our existence here, harming none who do not deserve harm, eternal in our damnation and our choice. Let that be enough." The hunter looked at the Count with something between pity and respect. "I will leave, but I will continue to watch. If you break the compact you describe, if you become the monsters my faith tells me you must eventually become, I will return, and next time I will not hesitate." "Understood," the Count replied. "And if you return with violence in your heart, I will not show the mercy I show tonight. This is the only warning you will receive." Father Albescu nodded slowly. He gathered his weapons, never turning his back on them, and walked to the great hall's entrance. At the threshold he paused and looked back at Elena. "I will pray for your soul, child, though I suspect my prayers will find no purchase with one who has chosen the darkness so completely." "Pray if it brings you comfort, Father," Elena said quietly, "but save your pity for those who need it. I am damned and free, and that is enough for me." The hunter departed, his footsteps echoing through the castle until they faded into silence. Elena and the Count remained in the great hall, neither speaking, processing what had just occurred. They had survived, but the encounter had shaken them both in ways that would take time to fully understand. Finally, the Count moved to Elena's side and took her burned hand gently in his. "You were magnificent. Foolish beyond measure, but magnificent. Walking into holy light like that could have destroyed you." Elena looked down at their joined hands, hers still red and raw from the cross's fire. "I could not watch him destroy us, could not let his certainty erase the choice we made. If I am to be damned, let it be for my own decisions, not for his interpretation of divine law." The Count raised her hand to his lips and kissed the burned flesh gently. "You are stronger than I dared hope, stronger perhaps than I am myself. 3 centuries I have existed, and I have never had the courage to face holy light as you did tonight." "It was not courage," Elena said. "It was rage. Rage at being told what I should want, what I should choose, what I should become. I spent my mortal life being shaped by others' expectations. I will not spend eternity the same way, even if defiance costs me everything." They stood together in the candle-lit hall, 2 damned creatures who had faced righteousness and survived through the strength of their convictions. Outside, Father Albescu departed into the night, carrying with him questions that would haunt him for the rest of his mortal life. Inside, Elena and the Count held each other and knew that they had passed some crucial test. The hunter would return someday. They both understood that. His faith was too strong, his vows too binding for him to truly abandon his mission. But for now they had won a reprieve, had proven that even the damned could choose their fate and defend that choice against those who claimed to know better. And in that small victory, they found renewed purpose for their eternal existence. They would not become the monsters Father Albescu expected, would not surrender to the beast within or the easy cruelty that immortality might encourage. They would remain damned, but not defeated, monstrous but not mindless, free in their darkness and defiant in their damnation. It would have to be enough, because anything less would prove the hunter right, and that, more than holy fire or righteous fury, was a fate neither of them could accept. A century passed like a dream half-remembered. Elena watched the world transform around her, while she remained frozen in the moment of her death and rebirth. The villages in the valleys below grew into towns, then cities. Railways carved through the mountains. Electric lights replaced candles and torches, pushing back the darkness that had been her domain. The Count had been right about so many things, but most of all about the terrible weight of immortality. They had remained together through all those decades, bound by choice and circumstance and something deeper that neither could name. Love, perhaps, though it was a love tainted by the blood they shared and the damnation they embraced. They hunted together, studied together, existed together in their castle refuge, while the mortal world spun on without them. And through it all, Elena felt the slow erosion of the humanity she had fought so hard to retain. It was not a sudden transformation. There was no moment when she could point and say, "Here, this is where I became the monster I swore I would not be." Instead, it was a gradual numbing, a slow calcification of the soul under the weight of centuries. Each life she took became easier than the last, each feeding more mechanical, less weighted with guilt. The faces of her victims blurred together into an endless procession of prey, no longer individuals with stories and dreams, but simply sources of sustenance. The Count noticed, of course. He noticed everything, his ancient eyes seeing through her pretenses with ease. But he said nothing for decades, perhaps hoping she would find her way back to the fierce defiance that had made her walk into holy light. Perhaps simply understanding that this was the inevitable trajectory of vampiric existence, the slow surrender to the beast within that he had warned her about from the beginning. It was on the centennial anniversary of her transformation that Elena finally acknowledged what she had become. She stood before the mirror in her chamber, a mirror that showed nothing but empty room behind it, no reflection to mark her presence. She remembered the girl who had danced at the Vacarescu ball, who had defied her betrothed for a single moment of autonomy, who had chosen damnation because it seemed preferable to captivity. That girl was gone. In her place stood something cold and hollow, wearing Elena's face but emptied of Elena's fire. The freedom she had craved had become simply another form of imprisonment, the cage of immortality no less confining than the cage of marriage would have been. She was trapped in an existence that stretched endlessly before and behind, with no possibility of change or growth or any evolution beyond the slow death of everything that had made her human. The Count found her there, staring at the empty mirror. He stood behind where her reflection should have been, and in the glass she saw only his absence as well. Two empty spaces where living beings should stand, ghosts haunting their own existence. "You are thinking of ending it," he said quietly. It was not a question. Elena did not turn to face him. "Yes. I have been thinking of it for years now. Decades, perhaps. The thought grows stronger each night I wake to this existence." The Count was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the mirror that denied their existence. "I understand. I have thought the same many times across my centuries. The weariness that comes from immortality is not something humans can comprehend. They think eternal life would be paradise, but they do not understand that existence without end is also existence without meaning." "So why do you continue?" Elena asked. "What keeps you from walking into the sunrise and ending it?" The Count's laugh was bitter, cowardice perhaps, or stubbornness. "The same defiance that made me choose transformation now keeps me from choosing final death. I will not give God or fate or whatever force governs existence the satisfaction of my surrender. But Elena, you are different. You chose this existence for better reasons than I did. You have the right to choose its ending as well." Elena finally turned to look at him directly. "And what of us? What of this century we have spent together?" The Count reached out and touched her face gently. "That century has been the greatest gift of my existence. You gave me companionship when I had resigned myself to eternal solitude. You reminded me that even the damned can choose their fate, but I will not be the chain that binds you to an existence you no longer wish to continue. If you need to end it, I will not stand in your way." "Would you join me?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the question. "Would you walk into the sunrise beside me and end this existence together?" The Count considered this seriously before answering. "No, I am too much a coward for that, too stubborn to admit defeat even after centuries of hollow victory, but I would hold you as the sun rises if that is what you wish. Would make certain you do not face that final dawn alone." Elena felt tears on her face, the first she had shed in decades. The emotion felt foreign, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Everything feels distant now, even this grief, even you standing here, offering to help me die. It is like watching life through glass. experiencing everything second-hand. That is the curse of our kind, the Count said softly. We exist but do not live, continue but do not grow. The years pile up like stones until we are buried beneath their weight. Some vampires surrender to madness to escape it. Others become so inhuman they lose the capacity to suffer. I have simply endured, neither mad nor beyond pain, carrying the weight because I am too stubborn to set it down. I do not want to become that, Elena whispered. Do not want to spend centuries more watching myself hollow out until nothing remains but hunger and habit. I would rather end it while I still remember who I was, while I still have enough humanity left to regret what I have become. Then we have a choice to make, the Count said. We can end it now, tonight, walk hand in hand into the sunrise and embrace whatever judgment awaits. Or we can try one final time to find meaning in this existence, to rediscover the purpose that made our damnation worthwhile. What purpose could we possibly find? We are predators hiding among prey, taking life to sustain our own stolen existence. There is no redemption in that, no meaning beyond survival. The Count turned her to face him fully, his hands on her shoulders. Do you remember Father Albescu, the hunter who came for us a century ago? Elena nodded slowly. Of course. He showed us that even the righteous could be made to question their certainty, that our damnation was not as simple as he believed. He survived that encounter, the Count said, his voice taking on a strange intensity, returned to his monastery and spent the rest of his mortal life struggling with what he had seen. He trained new hunters but taught them to question, to seek understanding before judgment. He died 20 years ago, still uncertain whether he had been right to spare us. His legacy lives on in an order that is more nuanced, more willing to see shades of grey in the darkness they fight. Elena tried to understand what he was telling her. You think we influenced him for the better, that our existence had meaning because it made one priest question his absolutes? I think we showed him that the damned can retain their humanity if they fight for it. That transformation does not have to mean surrendering everything good in ourselves. He spent decades wrestling with that knowledge and it changed him, changed the order he served. That is legacy, Elena. That is meaning, however small. But we have lost what made that legacy worth having, Elena protested. I am not the woman who walked into holy light anymore. I am hollow, emptied out by the weight of centuries. What meaning can a shell create? Then let us try to refill what has emptied out, the Count said urgently. Let us find the fire that made you choose damnation in the first place. I cannot do it alone, Elena. 3 centuries I tried and failed, but together perhaps we can remember how to be more than our hunger. Elena looked into his ancient eyes and saw the desperation there, the need for her to choose life, choose continuation, choose him. And beneath that desperation, she saw her own need reflected back, the longing for meaning in an existence that had grown hollow with repetition. How? She asked quietly. How do we find meaning when we are damned? The Count released her shoulders and took her hand instead. By helping those who face the same choice you once faced, by offering freedom to the trapped, even if that freedom comes with terrible cost, by being the thing that Stefan Dalka could not be, that your uncle could not be, that every man who sought to own you could never be, by giving choice to those who have none. You want us to create more vampires, Elena said slowly, understanding dawning, to transform others who are trapped as I was trapped. Only those who choose it with full knowledge, the Count said. Only those who would rather be damned and free than safe and enslaved. We will not force transformation on anyone, will not corrupt innocence or seduce the uncertain. But for those who truly wish to escape their cages, who understand the price and are willing to pay it, we can offer what was offered to you. Elena considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. It was dangerous, potentially disastrous. Each new vampire was another immortal predator loose in the world, another damned soul weighing on their conscience. But it was also purpose, a reason to continue beyond mere survival, a way to use their damnation to serve something beyond themselves. And when we find no one who chooses transformation, she asked, when the years pass and the trapped prefer their cages to our darkness, then we will know we were meant to end together, the Count replied. We'll walk into the sunrise hand in hand, and face whatever comes with the knowledge that we tried, that we spent our final years seeking meaning rather than simply surrendering to despair. Elena looked at their joined hands, his cold and hers equally cold, two dead things clinging to each other against the void. It was not the answer she had been seeking when she stood before the empty mirror, but it was an answer, a path forward when she had seen only ending. 1 year, she said finally. Give me 1 year to see if we can find this meaning you speak of. If by the next anniversary I still feel this hollowness, this terrible weariness, then we end it together. Agreed. Agreed, the Count said, and pulled her close. They stood together in the empty room before the empty mirror, two absences embracing, and found in that embrace something fragile but real. Not redemption, they were far beyond that, but purpose, direction, a reason to face another night, and another, until the year was spent. They began their search carefully, watching for the signs Elena had shown a century before. Women trapped in loveless engagements, men bound by family obligation to lives they despised, anyone suffocating under the weight of expectations they never chose to shoulder. They watched and listened and waited for the spark that would indicate someone capable of choosing damnation with open eyes. It took months before they found the first candidate, a young woman named Elena, engaged to a wealthy merchant twice her age, her father having sold her to settle his gambling debts. She had the same trapped desperation in her eyes that Elena remembered from her own reflection, the same fierce anger at a world that treated her as property. The Count approached her at a garden party, danced with her as he had danced with Elena, whispered the same dangerous questions. Would you rather be damned and free than safe and enslaved? Would you choose darkness if it meant choosing for yourself? Elena had looked at him with clear eyes and said yes without hesitation. And in her certainty, Elena saw an echo of her own choice, the defiance that had made her walk away from Stefan and toward the Count's offered hand. They brought Elena to the castle and told her everything, showed her the Count's journal with its unflinching account of 3 centuries spent damned, explained the hunger, the isolation, the slow erosion of humanity that came with immortality, gave her 1 week to consider, the same week Elena had been given, with no pressure or persuasion beyond the facts laid bare. Elena chose transformation, chose it soberly and seriously, understanding the weight of what she accepted. And when the Count's teeth pierced her throat and her mortal life drained away, Elena held her hand and whispered encouragement, remembering her own fear and wonder and terrible joy. The transformation renewed something in Elena she had thought lost forever, teaching Elena to hunt, to hide, to navigate vampiric existence. She found herself explaining not just techniques but philosophy, the importance of retaining humanity despite damnation, the necessity of rules and restraint when immortal strength made rules seem unnecessary, the value of each life taken, the weight that must be acknowledged and carried. In teaching these things, Elena remembered why they mattered, remembered the woman who had walked into holy light, defending her right to choose damnation. That woman had not disappeared, she realized. She had simply been buried under the weight of routine and repetition. But she could be excavated, brought back to the surface, made vital again through purpose. More months passed and they found others. Not many. The truly trapped were rarer than Elena had imagined, but enough. A young man fleeing an arranged marriage to a woman he could never love, a widow forced into a convent against her will, facing slow death of spirit in service to a god she did not believe in. Each was offered choice, given full information, granted time to consider. Some refused. Those the Count and Elena left in their mortal lives, respecting their decision, even when it meant watching them return to their cages. But some accepted. Some chose darkness and freedom over light and captivity, and each transformation felt like validation, proof that their own damnation had served some purpose beyond themselves. Father Albescu's successor came to the castle in the 11th month, a younger priest trained in the old hunter's more nuanced tradition. He had heard rumors of vampires offering transformation rather than forcing it, and came seeking truth rather than battle. The Count received him in the great hall as he had received Father Albescu a century before. They spoke for hours, the priest and the vampires discussing theology and morality and the nature of damnation. The priest argued that even willing transformation was corruption, that no mortal could truly consent to surrendering their immortal soul. The Count countered that agency was sacred, that the choice to be damned was more righteous than being saved against one's will. Elena listened to this debate and realized how far she had come from the hollow creature who had stared at an empty mirror a year before. She had purpose now, had meaning. The weight of immortality remained, but it no longer crushed her, no longer made existence unbearable. She had found a way to make her damnation serve something beyond mere survival. When the priest finally departed, unsatisfied but thoughtful, Elena and the Count stood together watching the sunrise from a shuttered window. Light leaked through cracks in the wood, deadly golden rays that would destroy them if given the chance. They stood at the boundary between darkness and light, neither fully in one nor the other. "The year is ended," the Count said quietly, "and here we stand, still damned, still immortal, still trapped in existence we did not ask for. Do you still wish to end it?" Elena considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. The hollowness had not entirely left her. She still felt the terrible weariness of immortality, still understood that eternity stretched endlessly before them, with no promise of rest or change or growth. But she also felt something else now: purpose, connection, the knowledge that their damnation could create choice for others trapped as she had been. "No," she said finally, "I do not wish to end it. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. We have found meaning in our darkness, however small. That is enough for now." The Count took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Then we continue. Together, damned and free, finding purpose where we can, and carrying the weight of what we are with as much dignity as damnation allows." They withdrew from the window as full sunrise approached, retreating deeper into the castle where darkness still reigned. Behind them, the world woke to another day of light and warmth and mortal concerns. Before them stretched another night, and another without end. But Elena no longer feared that endlessness, no longer felt crushed beneath immortality's weight. She had chosen this existence twice now, once when she accepted the Count's offer, and again when she chose to continue rather than end it. Each choice had been hers alone, unforced and deliberate. And in a world that had tried so hard to deny her agency, to make her choices for her, and trap her in lives she never wanted, that freedom was worth any price, even damnation, even eternity, even the slow erosion of her humanity that would eventually claim everything she had been, because she would rather be damned by her own choice than saved against her will, would rather burn bright in darkness than fade slowly in light, would rather spend eternity as monster than a single mortal lifetime as someone's property. The Count had been right about so many things, about the weight of immortality, about the slow erosion of humanity, about the terrible price of freedom purchased with blood. But he had also been right about the most important thing: that choice itself was sacred. That agency was worth fighting for even when it led to damnation. That the power to determine one's own fate was the truest freedom any being could possess. Elena Gheorghiu had died a century ago in a moonlit garden, her blood flowing into the Count's mouth, her humanity surrendering to darkness. But Elena the vampire had been born in that same moment, shaped by choice rather than circumstance, defined by will rather than obligation. And she would continue choosing, night after night, century after century, until the weight became too much to bear, or the sunrise finally claimed them both. But whenever that ending came, it would be hers to determine. Her choice, her fate, her damnation freely accepted. In a world of chains and cages, of obligations and expectations, of lives lived for others rather than oneself, that freedom was the greatest gift she could have received, even if it cost her soul, even if it damned her forever, even if it meant becoming the monster that mothers warned their children about in the dark. She was free, and that was enough. It would always be enough.